If you were to travel back in time 200 million years to a world ruled by the titans of the Jurassic, you might expect to find a landscape of unrecognizable monsters. But if you peered into the murky depths of a prehistoric riverbank, you might see something that feels hauntingly, impossibly familiar. You would see a crocodile. To the casual observer, this seems like a failure of evolution, a biological standstill. In a world where species are constantly being rewritten by the brutal hands of natural selection, the crocodilian lineage appears to have hit a cosmic pause button. This brings us to one of the most profound enigmas in paleontology, the 200 million year paradox. To understand this paradox, we must first define a term that sounds like a contradiction in terms: morphological stasis. In evolutionary biology, morphology refers to the physical form, shape, and structure of an organism. Stasis, conversely, implies a lack of movement. When we say a species is in morphological stasis, we aren't saying that evolution has stopped entirely. Genetic mutations are still happening, DNA is still drifting. What we are witnessing is a phenomenon where the outward expression of those changes remains locked. The blueprint stays the same, even as the world around it undergoes cataclysmic upheaval. Think about the radical shifts the Earth has endured since the Triassic period. The supercontinent Pangaea has fractured into the continents we recognize today. The atmosphere has shifted in chemistry and oxygen levels. Massive volcanic eruptions have choked the skies, and asteroid impacts have wiped out nearly 3/4 of all life on Earth. In the face of such chaos, most lineages are forced to change or die. They must adapt their limbs, their teeth, or their metabolic processes just to keep pace with a shifting environment. But the crocodilians have taken a different path. They have achieved a state of evolutionary equilibrium. While their cousins, the dinosaurs, were engaged in an evolutionary arms race, growing larger, developing feathers, or evolving complex social structures, the ancestors of the modern crocodile settled into a design so efficient, so fundamentally correct for their niche, that any significant deviation was actually a step backward. This is the core of the paradox. Why does evolution usually drive change, yet in this specific case, it seems to punish it? In most animals, change is the engine of survival. But for the crocodilian, the ideal form was reached incredibly early. We see evidence of this in the fossil record. While the lineages of mammals and birds show a frantic, branching explosion of new shapes, the crocodilomorphs exhibit a remarkable stability in their skeletal architecture. They have mastered the ecotone, the transitional space between land and water, and they have done so with such precision that 200 million years of environmental volatility have failed to nudge them from their course. They are not merely surviving, they are persisting in a state of perfection. To study them is to study the limits of biological design. They are a living testament to the idea that sometimes the greatest evolutionary achievement isn't to change. It is to remain exactly as you are. To understand why this design is so resistant to change, we have to look closer, beyond the scales and the eyes, and directly into the most critical piece of their biological machinery: the skull. If you were to hold a crocodilian skull in your hands, you wouldn't just be holding bone. You would be holding a masterclass in structural engineering. While many predators possess skulls designed for speed or specialized feeding, the crocodilian skull is a marvel of multifunctional stability. It is built to endure forces that would shatter the cranium of almost any other vertebrate. At first glance, the skull appears deceptively simple, but its architecture is defined by a concept known as secondary palatal development. Unlike many reptiles, crocodiles possess a bony roof in the back of their mouths, a secondary palate. This anatomical feature is a stroke of genius. It separates the nasal passages from the oral cavity, allowing the animal to breathe through its nostrils even when its mouth is full of water, or even when it is clamping down on struggling prey. This is a crucial piece of the ecotone strategy. It allows them to remain submerged and functional in a dual-environment existence without the risk of drowning. But the true genius lies in the skull's kinetic properties, or rather, the lack thereof. In many animals, the skull is kinetic, meaning the bones can move slightly against one another to absorb shock or allow for a wider gape. Crocodiles, however, favor a kinetic skull. Their bones are fused and reinforced into a rigid, heavy-duty box. This rigidity is essential for what comes next, the management of extreme mechanical stress. When we look at the sutures, the joints where the skull bones meet, we see a complex web designed to distribute the massive, localized pressures of a bite. A crocodile's skull is not just a container for the brain, it is a structural brace. It is designed to channel the immense force generated by the massive adductor muscles, the muscles responsible for closing the jaw, directly through the bone structure and into the rest of the body. This brings us to a fascinating, often overlooked detail of their cranial anatomy, the intertemporal region. In many extinct archosaurs, this area was a site of significant evolutionary experimentation. But in the crocodilian lineage, this area has become a reinforced pillar. This reinforcement allows them to utilize a death roll, a high-torque maneuver used to disarticulate large prey. To perform a death roll, the skull must withstand not just the vertical pressure of a bite, but the violent, twisting centrifugal forces of the entire body spinning in the water. A more evolved, lighter, or more specialized skull would likely buckle under these torsional loads. Even the placement of the sensory organs within this bony fortress is optimized for their specific lifestyle. The orbits of the eyes and the placement of the nostrils are positioned on the dorsal, or top, surface of the skull. This allows the crocodile to maintain a near-total concealment, with only the most vital sensory inputs breaking the water's surface. The skull, therefore, is not a static relic. It is a highly tuned, specialized tool of extreme durability. It is a design that manages the tension between two opposing forces, the need for sensory sensitivity and the requirement for crushing, mechanical power. It is a blueprint that, quite simply, has no room for error. But a skull is only as effective as the engine that drives it. If the skull is the chassis of this biological machine, then the jaw musculature is the heavy-duty hydraulic system that brings its lethal potential to life. To understand the sheer violence of a crocodilian strike, we have to move past the bone and into the soft tissue, the massive, complex bundles of muscle that inhabit the temporal fenestrae, the openings in the side of the skull. In most mammals, jaw muscles are optimized for a balance of speed and precision, allowing for the nuanced chewing required by complex diets. But crocodiles have abandoned nuance in favor of raw, crushing magnitude. The primary drivers are the M adductor mandibulae group. These muscles are not merely large, they are arranged in a sophisticated, multi-layered architecture that maximizes mechanical advantage. In physics, mechanical advantage is the ratio of the force produced by a machine to the force applied to it. In the crocodile, this is achieved through the strategic placement of muscle attachment points. By anchoring these massive muscle fibers deep within the skull and extending them far back toward the jaw hinge, evolution has created a high-torque lever system. When the crocodile closes its mouth, it isn't just snapping, it is engaging a force multiplier. The closer the prey is to the jaw joint, the less force is required, but as the prey moves toward the tip of the snout, the leverage changes. To compensate for this, the crocodilian jaw is designed with a unique force distribution profile. While many predators suffer from a weak jaw tip, the crocodile's muscle architecture ensures that even at the distal end of the mandible, the crushing pressure remains catastrophic. However, there is a hidden cost to this power: the opening problem. If the muscles required to close the jaw are massive and powerful, the muscles required to open it, the depressor mandibulae, must be relatively weak. This creates a physiological bottleneck. A crocodile can snap shut with several tons of force, but it cannot reopen its mouth with much speed or strength. This is why, in the wild, you will rarely see a crocodile struggle to open its mouth against a physical obstruction. They are biologically one-way engines. Once that trap is sprung, the mechanical advantage is so heavily weighted toward the closing phase that the prey is essentially locked into a terminal embrace. This brings us to a remarkable, less discussed phenomenon in crocodilian biomechanics: the role of connective tissue and passive tension. Recent studies suggest that crocodiles utilize a high degree of elastic energy storage within their jaw ligaments. As the jaw closes, these tissues stretch and store potential energy, much like a drawn bowstring. This allows for a rapid, explosive initial strike, the snap, followed by the sustained, agonizingly heavy crushing force of the adductor muscles. This dual-phase bite, the explosive snap followed by the hydraulic crush, is why the crocodile's feeding mechanism is so difficult to improve upon. It is a perfect marriage of kinetic energy and static pressure. To change this system would be to sacrifice either the element of surprise or the ability to process massive, bone-heavy prey. In the economy of survival, the crocodile has found a way to spend its energy with maximum return, wielding a bite that has remained functionally perfect since the Triassic. But if the jaws are the engine of this predator, and the skull is its chassis, what exactly protects the delicate biological machinery housed within the body? To look at a crocodile is to look at a landscape of living stone. Their skin is not merely a covering, it is a complex, multifunctional fortress. While most vertebrates rely on soft, flexible skin to facilitate movement and sensation, crocodilians have integrated a secondary skeletal system directly into their integument: the osteoderms. These are not just hard scales. Osteoderms are bony deposits that form within the dermal layer of the skin. Essentially, they are subcutaneous armor plates. To the casual observer, they look like a simple defensive shield, a way to shrug off the teeth of a rival or the claws of a competitor. And while that defensive utility is undeniable, the evolutionary why behind these bony plates runs much deeper than mere protection. In the realm of evolutionary biology, every new structure carries a metabolic cost. Growing bone requires calcium, phosphorus, and a significant expenditure of energy. For a trait to persist for 200 million years, it must provide a return on investment that far outweighs its cost. For the crocodile, that return is found in a sophisticated biological battery. Osteoderms serve as a critical component of the animal's thermoregulatory system. Because crocodiles are ectothermic, they are slaves to the ambient temperature of their environment. They cannot generate internal heat through metabolic combustion like a mammal. Instead, they must harvest it from the sun. The osteoderms act as thermal sinks. Their highly vascularized structure allows them to absorb solar radiation during basking periods and conduct that heat deep into the core of the body. Conversely, when submerged in cool water, these plates can help slow the loss of core temperature. They are, in essence, biological heat exchangers, allowing the crocodile to maintain a stable metabolic rate in an unpredictable world. Furthermore, there is a fascinating, less discussed role for these plates in mineral homeostasis. During periods of extreme environmental stress or dietary deficiency, crocodiles can actually utilize their osteoderms as a physiological reservoir. The bone tissue can act as a buffer, mobilizing stored minerals to maintain the precise blood chemistry required for nerve conduction and muscle contraction. In a world where food sources are seasonal and unpredictable, this internal bank of calcium and phosphate is a profound survival advantage. But we must also consider the mechanical implications. While these plates provide armor, they are not a rigid, monolithic shell. The arrangement of osteoderms is highly specialized, allowing for a segmented flexibility. They provide maximum protection to the dorsal surface while maintaining the ability to undulate the torso, a necessity for the powerful, lateral swimming motions that drive them through the water. This integration of defense, thermal management, and mineral storage represents a masterclass in evolutionary economy. The crocodile hasn't just grown tough skin, it has engineered a multifunctional interface with its environment. It is a system that manages energy, regulates temperature, and defends the body, all within a single, elegant anatomical feature. It is one of the many reasons why, when the world changed around them, the crocodile saw no reason to change itself. Yet, for all the physical fortification provided by their armor, a predator is only as effective as its ability to perceive the world. A fortress is useless if the sentry is blind. To understand the crocodile, we must look beyond the eyes. While their vision is formidable, equipped with a tapetum lucidum, a reflective layer behind the retina that amplifies low light, sight is a limited sense in the murky, silt-laden depths of a riverbed or the pitch-black shroud of a midnight swamp. To truly dominate their environment, crocodiles have evolved a sensory suite that turns the very medium of water into a high-definition map of their surroundings. If you were to look closely at a crocodile's snout, you would see thousands of tiny, dark pinpricks peppered across the scales. These are not scars, nor are they mere pores. They are the gateways to the integumentary sensory organs, or ISOs. These organs are a biological marvel of precision. Each ISO is a specialized mechanoreceptor, a microscopic sensor capable of detecting minute changes in pressure and water displacement. While a human skin cell might struggle to register a gentle breeze, a crocodile's ISO can detect the subtle, rhythmic pulse of a fish's tail beating 20 feet away, or the heavy, uneven splash of a panicked mammal struggling near the surface. They do not just feel, touch, they perceive the fluid dynamics of their entire world. They can sense the bow wave of an approaching object, allowing them to track movement in total darkness with a degree of accuracy that rivals modern sonar. This is sensory mastery at a molecular level. These receptors are so sensitive that they can distinguish between the chaotic turbulence of a rainstorm and the intentional, directional movement of prey. In many ways, the crocodile does not see an object so much as it feels the shape of the water moving around it. But the sensory web extends even deeper, beyond the skin and into the very bones. Crocodilians possess an extraordinary sensitivity to low-frequency vibrations, infrasound, that can travel vast distances through both water and earth. Through a process of bone conduction, vibrations from distant movements are transmitted through the skull directly to the inner ear. This allows a crocodile to remain a silent, invisible observer, sensing the approach of a threat or the migration of prey long before any visual cue is present. There is also a fascinating, often overlooked neurological component to this mastery, the integration of these senses. In most animals, sight, sound, and touch are processed as separate streams of information. In the crocodile, these inputs are fused into a singular, cohesive spatial awareness. The brain doesn't just receive a sound and a pressure change. It synthesizes them into a three-dimensional image of the environment. This sensory integration is the silent partner to their ambush strategy. It allows them to remain perfectly still, masquerading as a sunken log or a patch of river debris, while simultaneously maintaining a high-fidelity, real-time data feed of everything within their strike zone. They are not merely waiting, they are actively, invisibly, watching through the pressure, the vibration, and the dark. In the arms race of evolution, most predators have specialized in one sense, the keen eyes of the hawk or the acute hearing of the owl. But the crocodile has mastered the interface itself. They have turned the chaos of a dark, moving environment into a structured, predictable map, ensuring that in the world of the predator, nothing truly moves without being felt. But what happens when a design reaches this level of sensory and physical integration? In the relentless machinery of evolution, we often assume that change is the only way to improve. We see the cheetah evolve for speed or the whale evolve for depth, and we assume that stasis is a sign of a species waiting to be replaced. However, with the crocodile, we encounter a different biological reality, the plateau of perfection. To understand why they haven't changed, we must first understand the devastating cost of anatomical deviation. In evolutionary biology, every new trait comes with a metabolic tax. If a crocodile were to develop longer, more gracile limbs for terrestrial pursuit, it would require a higher caloric intake to fuel those muscles. It would sacrifice the buoyancy and stability required for its aquatic ambush. If it were to evolve a more streamlined, dolphin-like body for constant swimming, it would lose the low-profile silhouette that allows it to disappear into the shoreline. The crocodile exists in a state of optimal compromise. Its body is a mathematical solution to a very specific problem: how to be a heavy-duty tank on land and a silent ghost in the water. This is what biologists call stabilizing selection. While natural selection often pushes species toward new extremes, stabilizing selection acts as a cosmic brake. It penalizes the outliers. An individual crocodile born with a slightly different snout shape or a slightly more slender frame might be more agile, but it will likely be less efficient at the crushing bite or the low-energy weighting that defines its survival. In the brutal economy of the wetlands, being slightly better at one thing often means being fatally worse at everything else. Consider the physics of their silhouette. The dorso-ventrally flattened body, the way they are pressed from top to bottom, is not an accident of growth. It is a masterpiece of hydrodynamics and thermoregulation. This shape allows them to maximize surface area for basking in the sun to jumpstart their metabolism, while simultaneously minimizing their profile in the water to avoid detection. To change this shape would be to break the delicate equilibrium between their energy intake and their energy expenditure. Furthermore, their form is inextricably linked to their specialized, slow-burn physiology. A crocodile's morphology is built to support an ectothermic lifestyle. Their skeletal structure and muscle distribution are optimized for short, explosive bursts of power followed by hours, or even days, of absolute stillness. Most evolutionary upgrades involve increasing metabolic rate, making things faster, hotter, and more active. But for the crocodile, speed is a liability. High metabolism is a death sentence in an environment where food is unpredictable. By remaining morphologically stagnant, the crocodile has avoided the specialization trap. Many highly evolved predators become so finely tuned to a specific prey or a specific climate that they become fragile. When that one variable changes, they go extinct. But the crocodile's form is a generalist's masterpiece. It is a shape that works in the swamps of the Cretaceous and the rivers of the modern Anthropocene. They have not survived despite their lack of change, they have survived because of it. They have found a biological sweet spot, a configuration of bone, muscle, and sense that is so efficient, so mathematically sound, that any deviation is not an upgrade, but a flaw. They are not stuck in time, they have simply solved the equation of survival. But where exactly is this sweet spot located? To find the answer, we have to look beyond the individual animal and look at the map. In ecology, there is a concept known as an ecotone, a transitional zone where two distinct biological communities meet and overlap. Think of the thin, chaotic line where the forest meets the meadow, or where the desert meets the scrubland. These zones are often high-stress environments. They are unpredictable, subject to the whims of both ecosystems, and often lack the stability of a deep, interior habitat. Most species view the ecotone as a dangerous threshold to be crossed or avoided. The crocodile, however, has made the ecotone its throne. By positioning itself precisely at the boundary between the terrestrial and the aquatic, the crocodile has mastered a strategy of dual citizenship. It does not belong solely to the land, nor solely to the water. It exists in the tension between them. This is not merely a matter of convenience. It is a sophisticated tactical positioning that exploits the vulnerabilities of every other creature on Earth. Consider the logistical advantage of the shoreline. A terrestrial herbivore, perhaps a large ungulate, must eventually come to the water's edge to drink. At that moment, it is forced to leave the safety of the forest and enter a zone of high visibility. Conversely, a purely aquatic fish is bound by the limits of the riverbed. The crocodile sits in the in-between, occupying a spatial niche that is too wet for most land predators and too shallow for most specialized aquatic hunters. This edge dwelling allows them to exploit the edge effect, a phenomenon where biodiversity and energy flow are often highest at the intersection of two habitats. The crocodile doesn't need to hunt the entire forest, nor does it need to patrol the entire ocean. It simply needs to dominate the interface. This strategy also provides a unique form of environmental buffering. If a sudden drought turns the river into a series of disconnected pools, the crocodile can utilize its semi-aquatic mobility to move through mud and shallow channels that would trap a purely aquatic animal. If the land becomes too hot or resource scarce, the water provides a thermal refuge and a source of hydration. There is a profound scientific elegance to this. By living on the boundary, the crocodile effectively doubles its theater of operations while having its required territory. Furthermore, this ecotone strategy facilitates a unique type of interstitial predation. Because they are masters of the transition, they can strike from an angle that prey species are evolutionarily unprepared to defend. A land animal is looking for a predator in the grass. A fish is looking for a predator in the depths. Neither is looking for the shadow that emerges from the mud at the exact point where the two worlds collide. In the grand theater of evolution, most species strive to become masters of a single, stable domain. They specialize in the deep ocean or the high canopy. But the crocodile has realized that true resilience lies in the margins. By refusing to commit to one world, they have ensured that no matter which world is thriving, the land or the sea, the crocodile will always have a way to claim the spoils. They are the masters of the threshold, the eternal residents of the edge. But what is the true price of such a lifestyle? To understand the crocodile's dominance, we have to look past the violence of the strike and into the profound stillness that precedes it. In the biological world, movement is expensive. To run, to chase, to actively patrol a territory, these are activities that demand a massive, constant influx of calories. Most apex predators are locked in a high-stakes metabolic race. They must consume a certain amount of energy every single day just to fuel the machinery of the hunt. If the prey becomes scarce, the predator starves. This is the high-burn trap, an evolutionary commitment to a high-octane lifestyle that leaves very little room for error. The crocodile has opted out of this race entirely. They have mastered the art of ambush excellence, a strategy built upon the foundation of extreme energy conservation. While a lion or a wolf is a high-performance engine that requires constant refueling, the crocodile is more akin to a biological battery, capable of storing vast amounts of energy and releasing it in singular, devastating bursts. This is the sit-and-wait economy. By remaining motionless for hours or even days, a crocodile reduces its daily caloric requirement to a fraction of what a similarly sized mammal would need. They aren't just waiting for food, they are waiting for the universe to bring the food to them. This efficiency is driven by their unique metabolic architecture. Because they are ectothermic, they do not expend energy to generate internal body heat. Instead, they utilize the ambient temperature of their environment to regulate their physiological processes. When a crocodile sits submerged in the murky shallows, its heart rate drops and its metabolic demand plummets. In this state of near stasis, they are almost invisible to the energy expenditure sensors of the natural world. They are ghosts in the machine. But the true genius of this strategy lies in the payoff ratio. In a typical pursuit predator model, the energy expended during a failed hunt is a net loss that can be catastrophic. For the crocodile, the cost of the wait is near zero. When the strike finally occurs, a sudden, explosive activation of the massive epaxial muscles in the tail and the crushing force of the jaw, it is a momentary spike in energy consumption. Because the cost of entry for the hunt is so low, even a relatively small success provides a massive net gain in energy. This creates an incredible buffer against environmental instability. We see this in their ability to endure prolonged periods of fasting. A crocodile can go months, sometimes even a year, without a significant meal, surviving on nothing but the meager energy stored in its fat reserves and the slow, rhythmic pace of its low-octane life. This is a luxury no mammal can afford. In a world defined by feast and famine, the crocodile has turned scarcity into a tactical advantage. While other predators are forced to move, hunt, and risk exhaustion or starvation during lean times, the crocodile simply waits. They have decoupled their survival from the frantic pace of the biological clock. By minimizing the cost of living, they have maximized their capacity to endure. They have learned the most difficult lesson in evolutionary biology: that sometimes the most effective way to win the game of survival is to refuse to play it on anyone else's terms. But how does an animal maintain such profound stillness without slipping into a state of permanent dormancy? The answer lies in a sophisticated, externalized thermal management system, a biological thermostat that allows them to manipulate their own internal clock, using nothing more than the elements around them. To the untrained eye, a crocodile basking on a riverbank looks like a creature merely enjoying the warmth. In reality, it is performing a precise physiological operation. This is the solar charging phase. By orienting their bodies to catch the sun's rays, they are actively raising their core temperature to optimize enzyme activity and digestion. But they aren't just passive recipients of heat, they are masters of heat absorption. Their osteoderms, those bony plates embedded in their skin, act as more than just armor. They function as thermal sinks, absorbing solar radiation and conducting it deep into their muscular and visceral structures. This allows them to reach an operating temperature that facilitates rapid muscle contraction and high-speed digestion, even when the surrounding air is cool. However, the crocodile's genius is not found in how it gains heat, but in how it manages the surplus. If an animal simply absorbs heat without a way to shed it, it risks metabolic overheating, which can lead to cellular damage or death. This is where the ecotone strategy becomes a thermal necessity. The crocodile utilizes the water as a colossal heat exchanger. When their internal temperature climbs too high, or when they need to transition from a state of high alert readiness to a state of deep energy conservation, they slip back into the water. Through a process of conductive cooling, the water draws excess thermal energy away from their bodies with far greater efficiency than air ever could. This ability to toggle between the heat sink of the sun and the heat drain of the water allows them to maintain a narrow, optimal thermal window, regardless of the external volatility. This thermal flexibility grants them a physiological superpower known as metabolic flexibility. By manipulating their temperature, they can essentially dial their metabolism up or down like a volume knob. In the heat of the midday sun, they can accelerate their biochemical processes to prepare for a hunt or to process a massive meal. Conversely, by retreating into the cool, dark depths of a river or lake, they can induce a state of profound bradycardia, a dramatic slowing of the heart rate. In this cooled, low heart rate state, their oxygen demand drops to almost nothing. This is a critical advantage during long submersions. While a mammal would be racing against a ticking clock of oxygen depletion, the crocodile is operating in slow motion, stretching its breath and its energy for much longer than its biology would suggest possible. They are, in essence, using the environment to do the heavy lifting of homeostasis. They do not fight the temperature of the world, they dance with it. By treating the sun as a furnace and the water as a radiator, the crocodile has bypassed the need for the expensive, internal heating systems that define the mammalian lineage. They have traded the stability of a constant internal temperature for the versatility of an external one, a trade that has allowed them to remain unchanged and unshakable for 200 million years. But if thermal flexibility is the engine that allows them to survive the environment, what exactly fuels that engine? In the brutal theater of evolution, the most dangerous thing an organism can be is picky. To understand the crocodile's longevity, we must look at the concept of the evolutionary gamble. Most high-performance predators are specialists. Think of the great white shark, a masterpiece of biological engineering, or the cheetah, a lightning bolt of muscle. These animals have optimized themselves for a very specific, very narrow window of opportunity. The great white requires massive schools of specific fish. The cheetah requires vast, open plains and a specific type of gazelle. They are the aristocrats of the natural world, highly refined but dangerously fragile. If the prey shifts, if the climate alters the landscape, or if a specific species goes extinct, the specialist faces a biological dead end. They have optimized themselves into a corner. The crocodile, however, has rejected the luxury of specialization in favor of the generalist advantage. They are the ultimate opportunists, and in the game of deep time, opportunism is a superior survival strategy. While a specialist is a precision instrument, the crocodile is a Swiss Army knife. Their diet is not a menu, it is an open invitation. A single crocodile may consume anything from small fish and crustaceans to large ungulates, birds, and even other reptiles. This dietary plasticity is a critical hedge against extinction. When a drought dries up the seasonal pools and the fish disappear, the crocodile doesn't starve. It pivots to the mammals that come to the water's edge to drink. If the large prey becomes scarce due to a shifting ecosystem, they fall back on the smaller, more abundant organisms in the mud. This isn't just about being not picky. It is a sophisticated biochemical strategy, because they operate on such a low metabolic overhead, as we have seen through their mastery of thermoregulation. The cost of a meal is incredibly low. A specialist predator must catch a certain amount of high-calorie prey just to maintain its own body heat and energy levels. If they fail, they die quickly. But a crocodile can go months, sometimes even a year, without a significant meal. This ability to endure long periods of fasting, coupled with the ability to exploit whatever protein source is currently available, creates a massive buffer against environmental volatility. Furthermore, this generalism extends to their hunting tactics. They are not tethered to a single method of acquisition. They can be ambush predators, utilizing the sit-and-wait method to conserve energy, or they can engage in active pursuit when the caloric reward justifies the expenditure. They can thrive in freshwater rivers, brackish estuaries, and even the hypersaline waters of the ocean. In the grand narrative of Earth's history, ecosystems are constantly being rewritten. Species rise and fall in a chaotic cycle of boom and bust. The specialists try to keep pace with these changes, evolving faster and faster to stay specialized, often leading them into evolutionary traps. The crocodile does the opposite. By refusing to commit to a single food source or a single way of life, they have made themselves nearly impossible to dislodge. They don't need the world to stay the same. They just need the world to keep producing something to eat. And in a world of constant change, that is the ultimate insurance policy. But if dietary flexibility is their insurance policy against famine, what is their insurance policy against the predators of the world? To understand this, we have to look at where the crocodile chooses to stand, or more accurately, where it chooses to sink. While the crocodile is a master of the land, it rarely seeks to conquer it. Instead, it occupies the most strategic piece of real estate on the planet, the ecotone. This is the transition zone, the blurred boundary where the terrestrial world meets the aquatic. For most animals, the edge of a river is a place of vulnerability. For the crocodile, the water is not just a habitat, it is a tactical shield. When a crocodile slides into the murky depths, it isn't just moving into a new environment, it is entering a three-dimensional fortress. On land, an animal is bound by gravity and a two-dimensional plane. A predator can be flanked, outmaneuvered, or chased. But in the water, the crocodile utilizes the physics of buoyancy to negate its own mass. That heavy, armored body, which would be cumbersome on a hunt across a savanna, becomes weightless and silent in the water. This provides a profound tactical advantage, the ability to vanish. By submerging, the crocodile effectively removes itself from the sensory map of many terrestrial predators and competitors. They can remain submerged for extended periods, using their specialized anatomy to hide in plain sight. This isn't just about hiding from eyes, it's about hiding from the very concept of presence. Even more fascinating is the way they use the water to mask their most lethal weapon, their sensory suite. Crocodiles possess integumentary sensory organs, tiny, highly sensitive pits located along their jaws. These organs are capable of detecting minute pressure changes and vibrations in the water, allowing them to feel the silhouette of a swimming animal long before they see it. In the water, the crocodile becomes a biological sonar system. They aren't just looking for prey, they are feeling the heartbeat of the river. But the shield works both ways. The water provides a refuge from the very elements that define life on land. In times of extreme heat, the water acts as a heat sink, allowing them to dump excess thermal energy. In times of extreme drought, they can retreat into the deepest, most oxygen-rich pockets of a receding river system, waiting out the catastrophe that might kill a land-bound specialist. There is also a hidden physiological benefit to this aquatic refuge. When a crocodile is submerged, it can undergo a process called diving bradycardia, a dramatic slowing of the heart rate. This allows them to stay underwater, invisible and motionless for incredible durations. They are essentially ghosting the ecosystem, existing in a state of suspended animation that makes them nearly impossible to track or target. In the evolutionary arms race, most animals try to build better armor or run faster to escape danger. The crocodile took a different route. It realized that the most effective way to survive a predator is to simply exist in a dimension where that predator cannot follow. The water is more than a home. It is a sanctuary of physics, a cloak of invisibility, and a tactical barrier that has remained unbroken for 200 million years. By mastering the interface between two worlds, the crocodile ensured that whenever the land became too dangerous, it always had a way to disappear. But what happens when the land itself becomes a theater of giants? Imagine, for a moment, a world where the very ground beneath your feet is ruled by titans. For millions of years, the Mesozoic era was defined by the rise of the dinosaurs, creatures of staggering scale, possessed of terrifying speed, crushing force, and a metabolic demand that required constant, high-octane fuel. In the shadow of a tyrannosaur or a massive sauropod, a crocodile should, by all laws of evolutionary competition, have been an afterthought. An evolutionary footnote, crushed beneath the footfalls of the kings of the earth. Yet, while the dinosaurs were busy conquering the continents, the crocodile's ancestors were playing a much longer, much more subtle game. They didn't try to outrun the giants, and they certainly didn't try to outmuscle them. Instead, they survived by being the ultimate, low-stakes, players in a high-stakes world. This brings us to a fundamental rule of evolutionary survival: the cost of living. To maintain the massive, active bodies of the dinosaurs, an animal must eat constantly. They were high-performance machines that required a massive, uninterrupted influx of calories. This made them incredibly successful, but also incredibly vulnerable. If the food supply dipped, the giants were the first to starve. The crocodile, however, operated on a different economic model. By staying in the ecotones we've discussed, they bypassed the direct competition for the terrestrial resources that fueled the dinosaur empire. They weren't competing for the same grasses or the same herds of herbivores. They were waiting at the edges, harvesting the leftovers of the terrestrial world. When a dinosaur came to the water's edge to drink, it wasn't just visiting a resource. It was walking into a prehistoric kill zone. But the true genius of their survival during the Age of Giants lies in their ability to de-escalate their biological presence. While dinosaurs were evolving toward greater complexity and higher energy requirements, the crocodilian lineage was refining a strategy of extreme efficiency. They became masters of the waiting game. In the fossil record, we see evidence of this coexistence. We see massive, semi-aquatic crocodilomorphs, some as large as the dinosaurs themselves, occupying niches that would have been suicidal for a smaller animal. They weren't just surviving alongside the giants, they were often occupying the same apex roles, just in a different medium. They were the heavy cavalry of the swamps, providing a check on the terrestrial world that even the largest predators couldn't reach. Perhaps most importantly, the crocodile's survival was rooted in their metabolic buffer. During periods of environmental upheaval, when volcanic activity or shifting climates disrupted the food chains that supported the dinosaur populations, the crocodile could simply wait. They could lower their heart rates, slow their digestion, and endure weeks, even months, of near starvation. While the dinosaurs were forced into a frantic, high-energy struggle for survival, the crocodile was content to sit in the shadows, a silent, armored observer. They survived the era of the giants not by defeating them, but by being so fundamentally efficient, so tactically positioned, and so energetically inexpensive that the giants simply couldn't find a way to erase them. The dinosaurs were the spectacular, roaring fire of the Mesozoic. The crocodiles were the glowing embers, waiting patiently for the fire to burn itself out. But what if the true secret to their immortality isn't found in what they can do, but in what they don't need to do? To understand the crocodile's resilience, we have to look past the teeth and the scales and dive into the very chemistry of their existence. We have to talk about the ectothermic edge. While the mammals and dinosaurs of the prehistoric world were essentially biological furnaces, burning through calories to maintain a constant internal temperature, the crocodile took a different path. They opted out of the high-energy arms race entirely. In biology, we call this being an ectotherm. To the casual observer, it might look like a limitation, a dependence on the sun to jumpstart the body. But in the grand theater of deep time, ectothermy is a masterclass in economic survival. Think of a high-performance supercar. It is fast, it is powerful, and it is breathtaking. But it requires premium fuel, constant maintenance, and a steady supply of high-octane energy just to stay idling in the driveway. If the fuel stops flowing, the engine dies. This was the plight of the endothermic giants. When the climate shifted or the prey vanished, their massive metabolic burn rate became a death sentence. They were victims of their own intensity. The crocodile, by contrast, is the ultimate solar-powered economy vehicle. Because they do not expend massive amounts of energy to generate internal heat, their operating costs are a fraction of a mammal's. This creates a biological safety net that is almost impossible to breach. During periods of extreme scarcity, Perhaps a decade-long drought or a volcanic winter that choked the sun, a mammal must continue to hunt, to forage, and to burn calories just to keep its core temperature from plummeting. If they fail, they perish. But a crocodile can enter a state of profound physiological depression. They can descend into a metabolic stupor, slowing their heart rate to a mere few beats per minute and effectively pausing their need for sustenance. There are documented cases of modern crocodilians surviving for months, even over a year, without a single substantial meal. They aren't just holding their breath, they are fundamentally downshifting their entire biological existence. They can wait out a famine that would have wiped entire lineages of active predators off the map. This efficiency extends even to their digestion. While a mammal must immediately process food to fuel its high-energy lifestyle, a crocodile can consume a massive meal and then simply stop. Their digestive system is so efficient and their metabolic demand so low that they can store energy with incredible precision, utilizing it in tiny, controlled increments over vast stretches of time. This is the low-burn advantage. By refusing to participate in the high-energy lifestyle, they have decoupled their survival from the immediate availability of food. They have turned the volatility of the Earth's ecosystems into a minor inconvenience rather than an existential threat. In the brutal mathematics of evolution, the winners aren't always the fastest or the strongest. Often, they are simply the ones who can afford to stay in the game the longest. And in the economy of survival, the crocodile is the wealthiest creature on Earth. But if the crocodile's low-burn metabolism is the foundation of its survival, then its respiratory system is the sophisticated engine that manages that wealth. To understand how they master this slow life, we have to look at how they manage their most precious currency: oxygen. Most animals view oxygen as a constant requirement, a steady, uninterrupted stream of gas that must flow from the lungs to the blood to keep the fires of life burning. For a mammal, an interruption in this flow is a crisis that begins in seconds. But for the crocodile, oxygen is something to be budgeted, diverted, and cached. They possess a respiratory architecture that is unlike almost any other vertebrate on Earth, allowing them to navigate the thin line between the air and the abyss. At the heart of this efficiency is a specialized anatomical feature: the hepatic piston. Unlike humans, who rely on a diaphragm to expand the chest cavity and pull air in, crocodiles use their liver. By using specialized muscles to pull the liver backward, they physically expand the space in their body cavity, creating a vacuum that draws air deep into the lungs. This isn't just a mechanical quirk. It is a way to decouple breathing from the movement of their limbs, allowing them to maintain respiratory control even while submerged or struggling in a high-stakes struggle with prey. However, the true genius of the crocodile lies in its ability to handle hypoxia, the state of being starved of oxygen. When a crocodile lunges from the water to seize a victim, it enters a state of intense physical exertion while simultaneously holding its breath. In a typical animal, this would lead to a rapid, toxic buildup of lactic acid in the muscles, causing immediate failure. The crocodile, however, is a master of anaerobic glycolysis. They can switch their cellular metabolism to function without oxygen, producing energy through a pathway that is incredibly dirty from a chemical standpoint, leaving behind massive amounts of metabolic waste. In most creatures, this would be a death sentence. But the crocodile has evolved a unique blood chemistry that acts as a biological buffer. Their blood is capable of absorbing and neutralizing these acidic byproducts, transporting them safely until the animal can return to the surface. This leads us to one of their most fascinating, yet less understood, secrets: the shunt. Crocodilians possess a specialized circulatory bypass, a way to reroute blood away from the lungs and toward the body when they are submerged. This means they aren't just holding their breath, They are actively managing their internal plumbing to ensure that every precious molecule of oxygen is directed exactly where it is needed most. They can effectively shut down the parts of their system that aren't essential, prioritizing the brain and heart while the rest of the body operates on a minimal, recycled supply. This respiratory flexibility turns the crocodile into a master of the wait-and-see game. They can remain submerged for hours, invisible to the world, not because they are simply holding it, but because they have mastered the art of breathing in slow motion. They have turned the very act of respiration into a tactical tool. In the oxygen economy of the prehistoric world, the crocodile didn't just survive the scarcity, it learned how to thrive within it. But if they can master the flow of oxygen, how do they manage the sheer cost of living? To understand this, we have to look at the fundamental divide of the biological world, the difference between those who burn and those who conserve. Imagine two different ways to power a city. One is a high-output, nuclear-powered metropolis. It is vibrant, fast-moving, and incredibly productive, but it requires a constant, massive influx of fuel. If the power lines are cut for even a moment, the entire system collapses into darkness. This is the mammalian strategy, endothermy. Mammals are the high burners. To maintain a constant, high body temperature, their cells are like furnaces, constantly consuming calories to generate heat. This allows for incredible agility, complex brain functions, and the ability to remain active in the dead of winter. But this metabolic luxury comes with a heavy tax. A mammal must eat, frequently and relentlessly. A lion cannot afford a month of fasting. Its high-octane engine would stall, and its body would begin to consume itself. In the brutal math of evolution, the mammal is a high-stakes gambler, betting that it can always find enough fuel to keep the fire burning. The crocodile, however, plays a different game entirely. They are the masters of the low-burn life, the ectothermic strategy. Instead of burning calories to create heat, they scavenge it from the environment. They don't generate their own internal weather, they borrow it from the sun. This fundamental shift in philosophy changes everything. Because a crocodile's operating cost is a mere fraction of a mammal's, they exist on a different temporal scale. While a mammal might need to eat every day to survive, a large crocodile can go months, even a year, without a single significant meal. They are not fueled by the constant combustion of calories, but by the strategic accumulation of them. This makes them the ultimate survivors of scarcity. When a famine strikes or a climate shifts, the mammal dies because it cannot meet its energetic demands. The crocodile simply waits. It enters a state of physiological suspended animation, its heart rate dropping, its movements slowing, its very existence shrinking down to the barest minimum required to stay alive. This brings us to a profound evolutionary irony. In the history of life on Earth, we often view high energy as high progress. We see the speed of a cheetah or the intelligence of a primate as the pinnacle of biological achievement. But in the eyes of deep time, high energy is a vulnerability. It is a liability. The crocodile's low-burn metabolism is not a primitive limitation. It is a highly refined defense mechanism. By decoupling their survival from the constant need for food, they have bypassed the most common cause of extinction, the energetic crisis. They have mastered the art of doing more with less. In a world of boom and bust, where resources are unpredictable and environments are volatile, the crocodile has realized a truth that many more advanced creatures have forgotten. The most successful organism isn't the one that consumes the most, but the one that requires the least. They have traded the frantic, short-lived brilliance of the high-burn lifestyle for a slow, steady, and nearly indestructible endurance. But what happens when the waiting becomes a test of absolute endurance? What happens when the environment doesn't just fluctuate, but turns hostile? To survive the unpredictable, a crocodile must be more than just a patient predator. It must be a physiological fortress. Consider the threat of drought. In many parts of the world, one-slush river systems can vanish in a matter of weeks, leaving behind nothing but cracked, sun-baked mud and isolated, shrinking pools. For a mammal, this is a death sentence, a frantic, losing race to find water before the high-octane engine runs dry. But the crocodile has a different toolkit. Some species can enter a state of estivation, a form of summer hibernation. They can burrow into the mud, slowing their metabolic processes to a near standstill, effectively hibernating while the world above them burns. They become part of the earth itself, waiting for the first scent of rain to reanimate their ancient systems. Then there is the challenge of famine. We have already established that they can go months without food, but the true marvel lies in how they manage the internal chemistry of starvation. When a crocodile stops eating, its body doesn't simply wither. It undergoes a profound metabolic reorganization. They possess an extraordinary ability to manage their nitrogenous waste. While most animals must expel urea through frequent urination, a process that requires precious water, crocodilians can convert waste into uric acid, which is much less toxic and requires far less fluid to expel. This allows them to survive in environments where water is too scarce or too salty for almost any other large predator. And then there are the temperature swings. We often think of reptiles as being slaves to the thermometer, but the crocodile is more like a sophisticated thermal engineer. They don't just sit in the sun, they manage a complex heat exchange system. Through a process known as behavioral thermoregulation, they use the thermal inertia of water and the direct radiation of the sun to fine-tune their internal chemistry. But the true secret to their resilience during extreme thermal stress lies in their blood. During periods of intense activity or extreme environmental shifts, their muscles can build up massive amounts of lactic acid, a byproduct that would cause most animals to seize up or die from acidosis. Yet, the crocodile's blood chemistry is uniquely buffered. They can tolerate incredibly high levels of acidity and low levels of oxygen for extended periods, a phenomenon known as hypoxia tolerance. This means that whether they are trapped in a stagnant, oxygen-depleted pool during a heat wave or forced into a period of inactivity during a cold snap, their cells do not panic. They do not trigger a systemic collapse. They possess a physiological buffer zone that most life forms simply lack. This ability to absorb environmental shocks, to endure the drought, to outlast the famine, and to weather the temperature extremes, is what has allowed them to remain virtually unchanged while the world around them has been rewritten time and time again. They are not merely surviving the extremes, they have integrated the extremes into their very design. They have turned the volatility of the earth into a playground where they are the only ones who know how to play the long game. But what if the true battle isn't fought against the external world, but against the very chemistry of their own bodies? To understand the crocodile's invincibility, we have to look past the scales and into the microscopic theater of the bloodstream. When a crocodile engages in its signature death roll, an explosive, violent burst of kinetic energy designed to disarticulate prey, it is performing a feat of physiological suicide. In that moment of extreme exertion, their muscles are burning through energy at a rate that creates a massive, toxic buildup of lactic acid. In a mammal, this sudden spike in acidity would be catastrophic. It would trigger a systemic drop in blood pH, leading to metabolic acidosis, muscle failure, and eventually, cardiac arrest. A lion or a human would literally burn out from the inside. But the crocodile operates on a different set of rules. They possess an extraordinary capacity for anaerobic glycolysis, the ability to generate energy without oxygen. When they dive deep or fight hard, they aren't just holding their breath. They are entering a state of controlled chemical chaos. Their blood is packed with a sophisticated suite of biological buffers, primarily bicarbonate, which acts like a chemical sponge, soaking up the rising acidity before it can damage vital organs. This allows them to endure a level of lactic acid accumulation that would be lethal to almost any other vertebrate. They don't just tolerate the burn, they manage it, storing the metabolic debt and slowly neutralizing it during periods of rest. This leads us to perhaps their most profound survival mechanism, their mastery over hypoxia. Hypoxia is the state of being starved of oxygen, a condition that usually triggers a frantic, cellular panic. When a crocodile submerges for an extended period or finds itself trapped in a stagnant, oxygen-depleted swamp, its cells do not scream for air. Instead, they enter a state of profound metabolic depression. While most animals rely on a constant, high-pressure flow of oxygen to keep their mitochondria firing, the crocodile's cellular machinery is built for the low-flow economy. They have evolved a specialized ability to protect their brain and heart from oxygen deprivation, maintaining a delicate balance where the most vital organs are prioritized while the rest of the body essentially dims the lights to save power. Even more remarkable is their ability to handle the reoxygenation injury. For many animals, the most dangerous moment isn't when oxygen is low, but when it suddenly returns. The sudden rush of oxygen after a period of hypoxia can create reactive oxygen species, free radicals that tear through cell membranes like microscopic shrapnel. But the crocodile's blood chemistry is primed with a high concentration of antioxidants and specialized enzymes that neutralize these radicals the moment they appear. They can emerge from a suffocating, anaerobic struggle and return to a state of readiness without a single cell being compromised. This is the invisible architecture of their longevity. They have mastered the art of the biological pause. By turning the toxic byproducts of struggle into a manageable chemical debt, and by treating oxygen not as a constant requirement, but as a luxury to be rationed, they have bypassed the standard limitations of vertebrate life. They have conquered the very chemistry of exhaustion, ensuring that no matter how long the hunt takes or how deep the water gets, the engine never truly stops. It only waits. But what is the true price of this metabolic mastery? It is a price paid in the currency of time and movement. In the natural world, there is a relentless, invisible pressure toward speed. Evolution often favors the fast, the cheetah that chases, the hawk that dives, the mammal that constantly pursues. Speed requires a high-octane engine, a high metabolic rate, a constant intake of oxygen, and a relentless need for caloric fuel. This is the high-stakes gamble of the fast life. It allows for rapid growth, complex social behaviors, and the ability to actively hunt. But this speed comes with a hidden, devastating vulnerability. It makes you a slave to your next meal. A high-metabolism predator is an engine that cannot be turned off. If a mammal goes too long without food, its internal fire burns through its own muscle and fat until the system collapses. In the grand theater of evolutionary history, the fast animals are constantly dancing on the edge of starvation. They are biologically expensive. They require stable environments, abundant prey, and a consistent supply of energy to keep their cellular furnaces stoked. The crocodile has looked at this high-speed gamble and made a different choice. They have opted for the slow-burn economy. By maintaining a low basal metabolic rate, the crocodile has decoupled its survival from the immediate availability of food. While a mammal might perish after a week of famine, a large crocodile can drift in a state of near-suspended animation for months, perhaps even a year, waiting for the world to provide. This is not merely laziness. It is a profound strategic advantage. In evolutionary terms, the crocodile has minimized its overhead costs. They require very little capital to keep the lights on, which means they can survive the leanest of eras. This metabolic conservatism is why they have become the ultimate survivors of mass extinction. When the asteroid struck the Earth 66 million years ago, the world became a place of sudden, catastrophic scarcity. The high-energy giants, the dinosaurs, were forced to pay the ultimate price for their complexity and their caloric demands. Their engines simply ran out of fuel. But the crocodiles, they were already built for the drought. They were already masters of the low-flow existence. They didn't need the world to be lush and productive. They only needed to wait. This brings us to a fundamental truth of evolutionary biology. Being better isn't always about being faster, stronger, or more complex. Often, being better means being harder to kill. The crocodile has traded the ability to chase for the ability to endure. They have traded the frantic energy of the hunt for the patient stability of the ambush. They have accepted a slower pace of life in exchange for a near invulnerability to the fluctuations of the planet. In the long, brutal game of survival, the flashy, high-speed specialists are often the first to go extinct, while the patient, low-energy generalists remain. The crocodile is not a relic of a bygone era. It is a testament to the power of restraint. They have proven that in the relentless race of evolution, you don't always have to win by running the fastest. Sometimes, you win simply by being the last one still standing. Imagine, for a moment, the sky turning into a furnace. 66 million years ago, the Earth didn't just change, it broke. When the Chicxulub asteroid slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula, it wasn't just an impact, it was a planetary reset button. In the immediate aftermath, a wall of superheated debris rained down, igniting global wildfires that turned the atmosphere into a kiln. Then came the darkness. A thick, suffocating shroud of soot and sulfate aerosols choked the sun, triggering a nuclear winter that plunged the planet into a freezing, lightless gloom for years. In this hellscape, the biological hierarchy was inverted. The world's most successful organisms, the non-avian dinosaurs, suddenly found themselves trapped in a metabolic trap. They were the masters of their era, but they were also victims of their own success. Their massive bodies, their complex nervous systems, and their high-octane lifestyles required a constant, massive influx of calories. As the photosynthesis-driven food chain collapsed, the giants began to starve in real time. To be big and fast was to be a lighthouse in a storm. Highly visible, highly demanding, and impossible to sustain when the lights went out. But while the dinosaurs were collapsing under the weight of their own energy requirements, something else was happening in the shadows of the muddy riverbanks and the murky depths of the swamps. The crocodilians were there, but they were barely active. As the global temperature plummeted and the food web disintegrated, the crocodile didn't fight the chaos. It retreated into its own biology. While the dinosaurs were dying of starvation, crocodiles were entering a state of profound physiological retreat. Because of their ectothermic nature, they could drop their metabolic demands to near zero. They didn't need the sunlight to fuel their bodies, nor did they need the frantic movement of a high-energy predator. They could simply wait. There is a little-known nuance to their survival during this period: the refuge effect. Unlike many terrestrial animals that were exposed to the immediate thermal pulse of the impact, crocodilians occupied the ecotones, the transitional zones between land and water. Water is a magnificent thermal buffer. It absorbs heat slowly and holds it longer, providing a stabilized microclimate that shielded these reptiles from the most lethal temperature swings of the impact winter. Furthermore, while the primary food chain, plants to herbivores to carnivores, was obliterated, the detritus-based food web remained. In the murky, stagnant waters, the energy from dead organic matter continued to cycle. A crocodile, a generalist scavenger as much as a predator, could feed on the decaying remains of a dying world. They were the ultimate opportunistic scavengers of the apocalypse. The KPG extinction event was a filter, a brutal sieve that stripped away the specialized and the high maintenance. It demanded an organism that could endure darkness, cold, and famine. It demanded a creature that could exist on the margins. The dinosaurs were the kings of the sunlit world, but the crocodiles were the masters of the shadows. When the dust finally settled and the sun returned to a scarred Earth, the giants were gone, leaving behind only fossils. But in the cooling waters, a patient, armored silhouette drifted upward, ready to reclaim a world that had been cleared specifically for them. To understand why the giants fell, you have to understand the hidden tax of being magnificent. For millions of years, the dinosaurs operated on a high-stakes biological credit card. To sustain their immense size, their rapid growth rates, and their active, predatory lifestyles, they required a constant, high-volume flow of energy. Whether they were true endotherms, maintaining a constant internal body temperature, or mesotherms, occupying a middle ground of elevated metabolism, they were tethered to a relentless cycle of consumption. In the biology of the Cretaceous, movement was life, but movement was also expensive. This is the metabolic trap. A tyrannosaur or a triceratops was essentially a biological furnace. To keep those fires burning, they needed a massive, stable supply of calories. They were part of a highly efficient but incredibly fragile upward spiral of energy. Sunlight fueled plants, plants fueled herbivores, and herbivores fueled the apex predators. This system is a masterpiece of productivity, but it is also a house of cards. When the Chicxulub impact severed the link between the sun and the soil, the entire energy pyramid didn't just wobble, it evaporated. As the photosynthetic engine of the planet stalled, the dinosaurs faced a mathematical impossibility. Their caloric requirements were fixed by their massive body masses, but the available calories in the environment were plummeting toward zero. They were victims of their own physiological complexity. A high metabolism is a superpower in a world of plenty, but in a world of scarcity, it is a death sentence. They were running engines that required fuel in a world that had run dry. There is a specific, often overlooked aspect of this vulnerability: the cost of thermoregulation. Many large dinosaurs likely relied on metabolic heat to maintain activity levels in a cooling world. As the impact winter set in, the energy required just to maintain a functional body temperature would have skyrocketed. They were forced into a losing battle, burning more energy to stay warm while simultaneously finding less energy to burn. It was a feedback loop of exhaustion and starvation. Contrast this with the crocodilian strategy. While the dinosaurs were struggling to maintain a high-octane internal fire, the crocodile was essentially a biological miser. Through a process of metabolic depression, a crocodile can enter a state of physiological dormancy that is almost unfathomable to a mammal or a dinosaur. They possess a remarkable ability to manage lactic acid buildup, allowing them to go for months, even years, without a significant meal. Their bodies are designed to endure periods of extreme hypoxia, low oxygen, and nutrient deprivation that would cause the organs of a high-metabolism animal to fail. In the grand theater of extinction, the dinosaurs were the virtuosos performing a complex, demanding concerto. When the music stopped, they couldn't play. The crocodiles, however, were the masters of the silence. They didn't need to perform, they only needed to exist. They were built for the lean years, designed not for the glory of the hunt, but for the endurance of the famine. The giants fell because they were too expensive to keep alive. The crocodiles survived because they were cheap enough to endure. But what if the secret to surviving the end of the world wasn't being the strongest, but being the least demanding? In the biological ledger of life, every organism carries a debt. To grow, to move, to reproduce, and to maintain a constant internal temperature, an animal must pay a daily tax in the form of calories. For the dinosaurs, that tax was exorbitant. They were high-maintenance masterpieces, requiring a constant stream of high-quality fuel just to keep the lights on. But the crocodilians? They operate on a different economic model entirely. They are the ultimate budget travelers of the evolutionary world. While the dinosaurs were locked into a cycle of high-volume consumption, crocodiles perfected the art of the low-demand lifestyle. This isn't just about being slow. It is about a profound physiological capacity for austerity. One of the most overlooked mechanisms in their survival toolkit is their incredible tolerance for anaerobic metabolism. When a crocodile engages in a burst of activity, or when it is trapped in oxygen-poor water, its muscles produce massive amounts of lactic acid. In most vertebrates, this would lead to rapid systemic failure or profound muscle damage. But crocodiles have evolved specialized buffering capacities in their blood and tissues that allow them to endure extreme acidosis. They can essentially hold their breath metabolically, pushing their bodies into a state of near stasis that would be lethal to a mammal. This ability to decouple survival from constant consumption is what allowed them to ride out the impact winter. When the dust clouds choked the sun and the food chains collapsed, the world became a place of radical scarcity. For a high-metabolism predator, a month without food is a crisis. For a crocodile, a month without food is merely a Tuesday. We see this resilience in their ability to enter states of metabolic depression. They can downregulate their entire physiological engine, dropping their heart rate and oxygen consumption to a fraction of their active state. They aren't just waiting for the food to come back, they are actively reducing the cost of being alive. This low-demand strategy allows them to occupy a unique ecological position. They are the ultimate opportunists of the lean years. They don't need a thriving ecosystem to exist. They only need a single, occasional caloric windfall to reset their biological clock. Furthermore, their size, while significant, remained within a safe evolutionary bracket. They were large enough to deter many small predators, yet small enough that their absolute caloric requirement didn't reach the astronomical levels of the sauropods. They hit the evolutionary sweet spot, enough mass to be formidable, but little enough mass to be sustainable. In the wake of the KPG extinction, as the world's biomass plummeted, the crocodilians didn't have to fight for a seat at a crowded table. They simply waited in the shadows, their metabolic needs so minimal that they could survive on the crumbs left behind by a dying world. They proved that in the long, brutal history of Earth, the most successful design isn't the one that dominates the era of plenty, but the one that can most efficiently endure the era of nothing. They survived not by conquering the environment, but by being so easy to maintain that the environment couldn't afford to kill them. But if surviving the era of nothing was their greatest feat, how did they handle a world that refused to stay still? For much of the last 200 million years, the very stage upon which the drama of life was performed has been in a state of violent tectonic flux. The supercontinent Pangaea did not simply drift, it fractured, tearing the world into the jigsaw puzzle of continents we recognize today. As these massive landmasses drifted, they fundamentally reconfigured the planet's ocean currents and atmospheric patterns, turning lush, tropical belts into arid deserts, and vice versa. For most species, these shifts are death sentences. A sudden change in humidity or a new mountain range can isolate a population, severing its food supply and forcing a frantic, often failed, evolutionary race to adapt. Yet the crocodilian lineage did not just endure these shifts, they utilized them. As continents drifted, creating new coastlines, new river systems, and new isolated basins, the crocodilians didn't just move, they diversified. While their fundamental blueprint remained static, their geography became dynamic. This period of climate flux acted as a massive evolutionary sorting machine. When the world cooled, ushering in the brutal cycles of the Pleistocene ice ages, the crocodilians faced a terrifying reality. They are ectotherms, biologically tethered to the ambient temperature of their environment. A true freeze is a death sentence. However, we must look closer at how they navigated these thermal crises. It wasn't just about finding warmth. It was about the strategic use of refugia. As glaciers advanced and much of the Earth's surface turned into a frozen wasteland, crocodilians retreated into stable, microclimatic pockets, deep river systems, geothermal warmed wetlands, and equatorial sanctuaries that remained buffered from the global chill. There is also a fascinating, less discussed nuance to their survival during these shifts: the role of their semi-aquatic nature as a thermal stabilizer. Water has a much higher specific heat capacity than air, meaning it heats up and cools down far more slowly. By spending the majority of their lives submerged, crocodilians effectively decoupled themselves from the volatile, rapid temperature swings of the atmosphere. They lived in a thermal buffer zone, allowing them to survive in latitudes that would have been lethally cold for a terrestrial reptile. Furthermore, the shifting of continents created evolutionary bottlenecks. As land bridges rose and fell, populations were often trapped in isolated pockets of habitat. In most lineages, this leads to rapid speciation or extinction. But for the crocodilian, these bottlenecks often served to prune away the less efficient variations, reinforcing the perfected design. They didn't need to evolve new limbs to cross a new sea, nor new teeth to hunt a new prey. They simply waited for the environment to stabilize, or for the waters to rise and reconnect their worlds. They became the ultimate masters of the transition. When the world was hot, they thrived in the sprawling tropical deltas. When the world turned to ice, they hunkered down in the thermal sanctuary of the deep water. They didn't fight the changing tides of history. They drifted with them, proving that when the very ground beneath your feet is moving, the best strategy is to be part of the water. But what happens when the buffer zone fails, and the world turns against you with such ferocity that even the masters of the edge are pushed to the brink of non-existence? To understand the resilience of the crocodile, we must confront the terrifying concept of the evolutionary bottleneck. In the grand tapestry of deep time, a bottleneck is a moment of extreme biological crisis, a period where a population is decimated by catastrophe, leaving only a tiny, fragile handful of survivors to rebuild the entire lineage. For the crocodilians, these weren't just near misses. They were existential sieges that nearly erased them from the fossil record. One of the most profound, yet often overlooked, bottlenecks occurred during the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. While the world was heating up to an extreme degree, the suddenness of the carbon spike caused massive disruptions in freshwater ecosystems. For a lineage that relies on specific nesting temperatures to determine the sex of their offspring, a process known as temperature-dependent sex determination, this wasn't just a climatic shift, it was a reproductive nightmare. If the sand became too hot, entire generations could have been born exclusively female, or the embryos simply failed to develop. The lineage was squeezed through a needle's eye, surviving only because certain microhabitats provided the precise thermal gradients necessary to maintain a balanced sex ratio. Then, there were the periods of extreme aridification. As the tectonic shifts mentioned before turned once mighty river systems into salt flats and dust bowls, the crocodilians were pushed into fragmented refugia. Imagine a world where a species that once spanned continents is suddenly compressed into a few scattered, disconnected pools of water. In these moments, genetic diversity plummets. When a population becomes that small, they face the extinction vortex, inbreeding depression and a diminished ability to adapt to new pathogens. We see evidence of this in the genetic scars left on their DNA. Modern genomic studies suggest that crocodilians have undergone several periods of massive population contractions. During these bottlenecks, the evolutionary pruning we discussed earlier became brutal. The many specialized, strange, and experimental forms of crocodilians that existed in the Mesozoic, creatures with wildly different skull shapes and limb structures, were stripped away. The survivors were those that possessed the most generalized, most economical toolkit. It is a haunting irony of biology. The very events that nearly destroyed them were the ones that solidified their perfection. Every time the Earth attempted to reset the clock through drought, heat, or isolation, it acted as a filter. It killed off the specialists, the delicate, and the inefficient. What remained after every bottleneck was the same: a streamlined, high-endurance, low-energy survivor. They emerged from these genetic gauntlets not as a changing species, but as a refined one. They didn't evolve out of the crisis. They evolved through it, emerging on the other side with a biological blueprint so robust that it had already survived the worst the planet could throw at it. They are not just survivors of extinction, they are the products of it. They are the survivors of 1,000 near-deaths, sculpted by the very catastrophes that claimed almost everyone else. If you were to write a manual for surviving the end of the world, what would the first rule be? For the crocodilian, that rule isn't about strength, or speed, or even intelligence. It is about the art of being unnecessary. To understand the survivor's handbook, we have to look past the teeth and the scales and look at the philosophy of their existence. While the dinosaurs were engaged in a biological arms race, investing massive amounts of energy into growing larger, running faster, and maintaining complex social hierarchies, the ancestors of the crocodile were doing something radically different. They were practicing biological minimalism. The first lesson in their handbook is the mastery of the metabolic pause. Most apex predators are slaves to their own hunger. If they do not eat, they die. But the crocodilian lineage mastered a physiological loophole: the ability to decouple survival from constant consumption. Through a unique combination of ectothermic regulation and an incredibly efficient digestive system, they can enter states of profound dormancy. They can endure months, even years of famine that would starve a mammal or a dinosaur to death. In the eyes of evolution, the most successful organism isn't the one that eats the most, but the one that needs the least. The second lesson is the rejection of specialization. Evolution often rewards the specialist, the creature with the perfect beak for one specific seed or the perfect tooth for one specific prey. But specialists are fragile. When the environment shifts, the specialist becomes an evolutionary dead end. The crocodile's handbook dictates a different path: generalism. By maintaining a jack-of-all-trades anatomy, they ensured that no matter how the ecosystem rearranged itself, there would always be something on the menu. Whether it was a small fish, a large mammal, or even a decaying carcass, the crocodile's toolkit remained universally applicable. The third, and perhaps most subtle, lesson is the management of genetic risk. We spoke of the bottlenecks, the moments where their numbers plummeted, but there is a hidden strength in how they navigate these crises. Recent research into the epigenetics of crocodilians suggests a remarkable plasticity. While their physical form, their morphology, remains static, their ability to regulate gene expression in response to environmental stressors is incredibly fluid. They don't change their shape to survive a new climate, they change how their body responds to it at a cellular level. They are masters of internal adjustment. Finally, there is the lesson of the low-impact footprint. High-metabolism animals, like the dinosaurs or modern mammals, require vast territories and massive caloric inflows to sustain their engines. This makes them hyper-vulnerable to habitat fragmentation. A crocodile, however, can thrive in a stagnant, oxygen-depleted pool that would be a graveyard for almost any other large predator. They occupy the low-energy niches, the cracks in the system where life is difficult for everyone else. When you look at a crocodile today, you aren't looking at a primitive relic that failed to keep up with the times. You are looking at a highly sophisticated, battle-hardened veteran of deep time. They have looked at the chaos of 200 million years, the shifting continents, the cooling oceans, the falling asteroids, and they have found the common denominator of survival. Their handbook is simple: stay efficient, stay general, and never, ever outgrow your ability to endure. But if they were so successful at being minimalist, How did they avoid being swallowed whole by the giants that shared their world? To answer that, we have to dispel a common misconception: the idea that crocodiles and dinosaurs were bitter enemies locked in a constant struggle for dominance. In reality, they weren't just competitors, they were cousins. Both lineages belong to a broader group called archosaurs, the ruling reptiles. If you look at a family tree, dinosaurs and crocodilians are branches of the same ancient trunk. They share a fundamental architectural heritage: the diapsid skull, characterized by two temporal openings behind the eye socket. This structural blueprint allowed for more complex jaw musculature, a trait that both groups exploited to become the most formidable predators the Earth has ever seen. However, while they shared a common ancestor, their evolutionary strategies diverged into two completely different philosophies of life. The dinosaurs chose the path of the high-performance machine. They leaned into the advantages of endothermy, or at least, a highly active form of mesothermy. They invested heavily in growth rates, bone density, and massive locomotive power. They were the sprinters, the heavyweights, and the high-energy gamblers of the Mesozoic. To maintain such colossal bodies, they required a constant, high-octane influx of calories. They were built for the now, for the rapid expansion and dominance of a changing world. The crocodilians, meanwhile, chose the path of the deep time specialist. While dinosaurs were busy evolving into everything from the tiny, feathered Microraptor to the mountain-sized Argentinosaurus, the ancestors of the crocodile remained focused on a single, narrow, but incredibly stable boundary: the water's edge. This is where the distinction becomes critical. Dinosaurs were masters of the terrestrial landscape, evolving to conquer the plains, the forests, and the skies. But they were largely tethered to the land. The crocodile, however, exploited the ecotone, the transition zone between land and water. By anchoring their existence to the aquatic realm, they occupied a niche that was fundamentally different from the dinosaurian empire. Even when the most terrifying predators of the Cretaceous emerged, the massive, terrestrial theropods, they couldn't truly compete with a crocodile in its own domain. A dinosaur might rule the forest, but once it stepped into the murky, oxygen-poor shallows of a swamp, it was no longer the hunter. It was the prey. Furthermore, we must look at the phylogenetic ghost in the room, the Pseudosuchia. Before the dinosaurs truly rose to dominance, the crocodile lineage actually had its own dinosaurs: massive, bizarre, land-dwelling archosaurs like the Roysuchians. These were the true competitors, terrifying apex predators that ruled the Triassic landscape. But as the climate shifted and the dinosaurian lineage perfected its high-energy movement, these terrestrial crocodile cousins faded into extinction. The lineage we see today is the result of a strategic retreat. They abandoned the arms race of the land and perfected the art of the ambush in the water. They didn't lose the competition, they simply changed the game. While the dinosaurs were busy trying to outrun time, the crocodilians were busy waiting for it to pass. But if the crocodilian blueprint was so successful, why does the modern world contain such a striking variety of shapes? If they were waiting for time to pass, why did they allow themselves to drift so far apart? To understand this, we have to look past the word crocodile, a term we often use as a catch-all, and recognize that we are actually looking at three distinct evolutionary experiments. While they all share that ancient, armored architecture, they have diverged into specialized toolkits designed for very different ways of life. First, we have the alligators, the specialists of the freshwater realm. To the untrained eye, an alligator looks like a crocodile, but the subtle differences are a masterclass in niche partitioning. If you look closely at their snout, you'll notice it is broader, more U-shaped, and built for crushing power rather than precision. This is a structural adaptation for a diet often consisting of turtles and heavy-bodied prey. But the real secret lies in their salt tolerance. Unlike their saltwater cousins, alligators lack highly developed salt glands. This keeps them tethered to the inland, swamps, and rivers, preventing them from competing with more marine-capable predators. They are the heavy tanks of the freshwater ecosystem, built to hold their ground in the muddy shadows of the bayou. Then, we encounter the true crocodiles, the masters of the interface. These are the generalists that bridged the gap between fresh and salt water. They possess a specialized lingual salt gland, an evolutionary filter that allows them to excrete excess sodium. This single physiological innovation opened up entire oceans and estuaries to them, allowing them to colonize coastlines and mangrove forests that were inaccessible to alligators. Their snouts are narrower, more V-shaped, and their dentition is more visible even when the mouth is closed, a result of a jaw alignment that favors both a lethal snap and a crushing grip. They are the ultimate opportunists, capable of patrolling the brackish margins where the land meets the tide. But then there is the outlier, the gharial. If the alligator is a tank and the crocodile is a multi-role fighter, the gharial is a precision instrument. With a snout so impossibly long and thin it looks almost fragile, the gharial defies the heavy-duty stereotype of the crocodilian lineage. But this isn't a design flaw, it is a hyperspecialization. The gharial has abandoned the crush-everything strategy in favor of a snatch-everything approach. That elongated snout reduces water resistance, allowing the jaw to whip sideways through the water with incredible speed to catch slippery, fast-moving fish. They have traded the ability to tackle large mammals for the ability to dominate the river systems with surgical precision. What this tells us is that morphological stasis is a bit of a myth. The blueprint hasn't changed, but the applications of that blueprint have. Evolution didn't force the crocodilian body to change its fundamental physics. Instead, it played with the dimensions. It stretched the snout, widened the skull, and refined the salt glands. They didn't reinvent the wheel, they simply changed the tires to suit the terrain. They proved that you don't need to evolve a new body to survive a new world. You just need to tweak the tools you already have. But if the blueprint is so stable, how do we explain these radical departures in shape? If the core architecture is a masterpiece of engineering, why did evolution decide to tinker with the most sensitive part of the machine, the snout? To understand this, we have to look at the concept of morphological drift. In the evolutionary world, drift doesn't mean a loss of direction. It means a movement toward a specific, high-stakes specialization. For crocodilians, the snout is not just a part of the face. It is a biological lever, a sensory array, and a hydraulic tool. When a lineage moves into a new niche, the pressure to optimize that lever becomes an evolutionary mandate. Consider the physics of fluid dynamics. In a standard crocodile, the snout is a compromise. It is wide enough to exert massive bite force, yet narrow enough to move through water without creating a massive pressure wave that would alert prey. But when a lineage commits fully to a piscivorous or fish-eating lifestyle, the compromise is no longer enough. This is where we see the extreme divergence of the long gyrostrine snout. By lengthening the rostrum, evolution effectively reduces the frontal area of the jaw. This minimizes hydrodynamic drag. In the split second a gharial strikes, its snout isn't pushing a wall of water. It is slicing through it like a needle through silk. This allows for a lateral snap velocity that a broad-snouted alligator could never achieve. This isn't just a change in shape. It is a fundamental shift in the physics of the hunt. However, this specialization comes with a heavy evolutionary tax. The more you optimize for speed, the more you sacrifice structural integrity. A gharial snout, while a marvel of precision, would likely shatter if it attempted to tackle the heavy, bone-crushing prey that an alligator handles with ease. This is the specialist's trap. Evolution has driven these animals into distinct corners of the ecological map, ensuring that they rarely compete for the same calories. They have used the same basic skeletal framework to inhabit entirely different physical realities. But the drift goes deeper than just the length of the jaw. It extends to the very arrangement of the neurovascular system. In many specialized species, the integumentary sensory organs, those tiny, black dots on the scales that detect pressure changes in the water, are concentrated in specific patterns along the snout. In a generalist, these sensors are distributed to monitor a wide field of movement. In a specialist, they are fine-tuned to detect the specific, high-frequency vibrations of a schooling fish. This tells us something profound about the nature of stasis. When we say crocodiles haven't changed in 200 million years, we aren't saying they are frozen in time. We are saying that the logic of their design is so perfect that evolution no longer needs to rewrite the code. It only needs to adjust the parameters. The morphological drift we see today is evidence of a lineage that has mastered the art of the tweak. They have found the perfect balance between a body that is robust enough to survive a mass extinction and a toolkit that is flexible enough to exploit every corner of the water's edge. They are not static, they are infinitely scalable. Yet, if we look closely at the fossil record, we find a truth that challenges the very idea of a stable design. For every streamlined gharial and every robust alligator we see today, there are shadows in the strata, biological echoes of titans that once walked and swam alongside the dinosaurs. These are the ghost lineages. They remind us that while the concept of the crocodilian is eternal, the expressions of that concept have, at times, reached terrifying, gargantuan proportions. To understand the full scope of this evolutionary experimentation, we must look back to the late Cretaceous, to a creature that makes our modern Nile crocodile look like a mere hatchling, Deinonychus. If the modern crocodile is a scalpel, Deinonychus was a sledgehammer. Reaching lengths of up to 12 meters, this wasn't just a larger version of a modern predator. It was a specialized apex killer that occupied a niche we can barely comprehend. While modern crocodilians are masters of the water's edge, Deinonychus was a master of the deep coastal swamps, capable of hunting massive dinosaurs that came to the water to drink. But here is where the science gets truly fascinating. Paleontologists have noted something peculiar about the skull morphology of these giants. Unlike the modern generalist, Deinonychus possessed an incredibly thickened, rugose skull texture. This wasn't just for show. It provided massive attachment points for jaw muscles that produced bite forces arguably exceeding those of Tyrannosaurus rex. Furthermore, recent studies into the bone histology of such giants suggest they may have been navigating a complex thermal reality, potentially possessing a much higher metabolic rate than their modern, sluggish descendants. They were a high-stakes experiment in megacrocodilian biology. And they were not alone. In the shadows of the Cretaceous, we find the Sarcosuchus, often nicknamed supercroc. While Deinonychus was a heavy-set crusher, Sarcosuchus represented a different evolutionary gamble. A massive, semi-aquatic giant with a snout that, while large, still retained some of that specialized hydrodynamic efficiency. So why did these ghosts vanish? Why did the lineage shrink back to the more manageable, efficient sizes we see today? The answer lies in the very efficiency we have been discussing. The ghost lineages were often victims of their own specialization. They were the high-burn, high-reward models of the reptilian world. They required massive caloric intake and stable, high-productivity environments to maintain their immense biomass. When the KPG extinction event triggered a collapse in the global food web, these giants were the first to go. They were too big to hide and too hungry to survive the famine. The survivors were the ones who embraced the slow life, the smaller, the more metabolic efficient, and the more generalist. The modern crocodile is not the standard version of the design, it is the refined version. It is the distilled essence of a lineage that learned how to scale down to survive. When we look at a modern crocodile, we aren't just looking at a survivor. We are looking at the wreckage of a much more diverse and much more dangerous family tree. The ghosts of Deinasuchus and Sarcosuchus are the cautionary tales written in stone, proving that in the game of evolution, being the biggest isn't nearly as important as being the most sustainable. Nature is a master of repetition, but it is rarely a master of perfection. If you look across the vast expanse of biological history, you will see a phenomenon known as convergent evolution, the process where unrelated species independently evolve similar traits to solve the same problems. It is the reason why dolphins and sharks share a streamlined silhouette, or why bats and birds both mastered the sky. But when we look at the specific, lethal blueprint of the crocodilian, we see something much more profound. We see a design so fundamentally optimized that nature has tried to replicate it time and time again, only to find itself hitting an evolutionary dead end. The crocodilian niche, the semi-aquatic, ambush predator, low metabolism specialist, is perhaps the most unbeatable role in the animal kingdom. And because it is so successful, evolution has repeatedly attempted to reinvent the crocodile in entirely different lineages. Consider the mosasaurs of the Cretaceous. These were not reptiles of the crocodilian lineage. They were actually highly evolved monitor lizards that returned to the sea. They developed powerful tails, sensory organs for detecting vibrations, and massive, crushing jaws. For millions of years, they were the undisputed masters of the ocean, mimicking the tactical advantages of the crocodilian lifestyle on a marine scale. They were the crocodiles of the deep. But like the giants we just discussed, they were specialists. When the world changed, their high-energy requirement for maintaining such massive, active bodies became a liability. They were a brilliant imitation, but they lacked the metabolic insurance policy that makes the true crocodile so resilient. We see this same pattern in the prehistoric metriorhynchids, marine crocodilomorphs that went an entire step further. They didn't just mimic the crocodile, they transformed into something resembling a cross between a crocodile and an ichthyosaur. They lost their limbs in favor of paddles and developed a tail fin. They were attempting to push the crocodilian design into a purely oceanic, high-speed existence. Yet, they too vanished, leaving the crown to the true generalists. Even in the modern era, we see the failed attempts of mammals. Look at the platypus or the various species of otters. They have moved into the water, they have developed sensory systems to detect prey in murky depths, and they have mastered the interface of land and liquid. But they are playing a different game. To maintain their warmth and their activity, they must consume staggering amounts of calories. They are trapped in a high burn cycle. If the food supply dips, they perish. This brings us to the core of the paradox. Evolution is often viewed as a ladder, an upward climb toward better or more complex organisms. But the crocodile proves that evolution is actually a series of trade-offs. The reason other animals fail to mimic the crocodile is that they cannot replicate the crocodile's greatest secret, the ability to be low performance during the bad times and high lethality during the good ones. To mimic the crocodile's shape, you often have to sacrifice the very metabolic efficiency that makes the shape worth having. The crocodilian design is a biological sweet spot, a perfect equilibrium between energy expenditure and predatory output. In the grand theater of life, many have stepped onto the stage wearing the mask of the crocodile. But while they were busy perfecting the costume, the true masters were busy perfecting the survival. But if the physical form is a masterpiece of engineering, does the internal code share this same sense of permanence? To understand the true depth of this evolutionary stillness, we have to look past the scales and the teeth and peer into the very nucleus of their cells. We have to look at the genetic clock. In most lineages, the genome is a frantic, churning river of change. Mutations accumulate, gene duplications occur, and selective pressures force the DNA to rewrite itself in a constant race to keep up with a changing world. But when we sequence the genomes of modern crocodilians, we find something startling. We find a molecular signature of stability that is almost unprecedented in the vertebrate world. While many animals possess highly plastic genomes, meaning their DNA is prone to rapid rearrangement and frequent evolutionary experimentation, the crocodilian genome appears to be governed by a profound sense of conservation. Scientists have observed that certain critical regulatory genes, the master switches that dictate how an embryo develops its body plan, have remained remarkably unchanged for millions of years. In a sense, the crocodile's genetic instructions were locked in during the Mesozoic era. This brings us to a fascinating, less discussed concept in evolutionary biology, the idea of genomic buffering. It is as if the crocodile has developed a sophisticated molecular toolkit that protects its core blueprint from the erosive effects of genetic drift. While other species are constantly forced to patch their DNA to survive new environmental stressors, the crocodile's genetic architecture is built to absorb these shocks without altering the fundamental design. Recent genomic studies have also revealed a surprising complexity in how they manage their metabolic genes. We know they are masters of low energy, but their DNA reveals a highly specialized suite of genes dedicated to managing hypoxia, the lack of oxygen, and extreme lactic acid buildup. While a mammal's DNA would struggle to regulate the massive chemical shifts that occur during a long anaerobic struggle, the crocodile's genetic code contains ancient, highly optimized pathways for cellular repair and metabolic suppression. They aren't just slow, they are genetically programmed for endurance. Furthermore, when we compare the genetic distance between different crocodilian species, we see a pattern of slow-motion divergence. In most animal families, you see rapid bursts of genetic innovation that lead to wildly different body plans. In crocodilians, the genetic changes are incremental, subtle, and almost entirely focused on minor specializations, like the lengthening of a snout or the slight shifting of a tooth pattern, rather than a fundamental overhaul of the organism. This suggests that the crocodile is not stagnant because it has stopped evolving. Rather, it is stagnant because it has already reached a local optimum in the fitness landscape. In the language of mathematics, they have found the highest peak on the mountain. To evolve further, to change their fundamental shape, would require a descent into a valley of lower efficiency. The genetic clock tells us that the crocodile is not a relic of a bygone era, waiting to be replaced. Instead, it is a biological fortress. Their DNA is not a record of constant struggle and adaptation, but a testament to a design so mathematically sound that, at a molecular level, there is simply nothing left to improve. But if the crocodile is a biological fortress, what happens when the very ground it stands on begins to dissolve? For 200 million years, the greatest threats to this lineage were tectonic shifts, cooling climates, and the sudden, violent arrival of asteroids. These were natural catastrophes, massive, impersonal, and governed by the slow, predictable rhythms of planetary physics. But we have entered a new epoch, one that operates on a timescale the crocodile's genetic buffering was never designed to absorb, the Anthropocene. For the first time in their long history, the primary driver of change is not the movement of continents or the drift of oceans, but the rapid, localized decisions of a single species. Humans have become the new extinction event, but unlike the KPG impact, we are not a singular strike. We are a relentless, multifaceted erosion. One of the most insidious ways we are challenging this ancient design is through habitat fragmentation. The crocodile is an ecotone specialist. It requires a seamless transition between deep water and terrestrial banks. However, human infrastructure, dams, levees, and urban sprawl is carving these vital corridors into isolated islands. When a wetland is severed from its neighboring ecosystem, the crocodile's generalist advantage is neutralized. They become trapped in shrinking pockets of habitat, unable to migrate to find new prey or mates, effectively turning their evolutionary stronghold into a cage. Even more alarming is a silent, chemical assault on their fundamental biology. As apex predators, crocodilians are subject to extreme biomagnification. Because they sit at the top of the food web, they accumulate concentrations of heavy metals and persistent organic pollutants, like PCBs and pesticides, that are thousands of times higher than those found in the surrounding water. We are seeing evidence that these modern toxins can interfere with the very endocrine systems that have remained stable since the Jurassic, potentially disrupting growth and immune function in ways their DNA cannot buffer against. Perhaps most critically, we are attacking the one thing the crocodile cannot control: its reproductive clock. Crocodilians rely on temperature-dependent sex determination, or TSD. Unlike mammals, where sex is determined by chromosomes, the sex of a crocodile hatchling is dictated by the heat of the nest. For millions of years, this was a stable mechanism. But as anthropogenic climate change drives global temperatures upward, we are witnessing a dangerous skewing of sex ratios. In many regions, nests are producing almost exclusively females. This isn't just a demographic shift. It is a reproductive bottleneck that could collapse entire populations within a few generations. The crocodile has survived the death of the dinosaurs because it was built to endure scarcity and chaos. It has survived because it is a master of the slow life. But the Anthropocene is not a slow change. It is a high-velocity disruption. We are changing the chemistry of the water, the temperature of the sand, and the connectivity of the land faster than the crocodiles, slow motion, evolution can respond. The question is no longer whether the crocodile's design is perfect. The design is flawless. The question is whether even a masterpiece of engineering can survive a world that is changing faster than life itself can adapt. But if the crocodile is a biological fortress, what happens when the very ground it stands on begins to dissolve? For 200 million years, the greatest threats to this lineage were tectonic shifts, cooling climates, and the sudden, violent arrival of asteroids. These were natural catastrophes, massive, impersonal, and governed by the slow, predictable rhythms of planetary physics. But we have entered a new epoch, one that operates on a timescale the crocodile's genetic buffering was never designed to absorb: the Anthropocene. For the first time in their long history, the primary driver of change is not the movement of continents or the drift of oceans, but the rapid, localized decisions of a single species. Humans have become the new extinction event, but unlike the KPG impact, we are not a singular strike. We are a relentless, multifaceted erosion. One of the most insidious ways we are challenging this ancient design is through habitat fragmentation. The crocodile is an ecotone specialist. It requires a seamless transition between deep water and terrestrial banks. However, human infrastructure, dams, levees, and urban sprawl is carving these vital corridors into isolated islands. When a wetland is severed from its neighboring ecosystem, the crocodile's generalist advantage is neutralized. They become trapped in shrinking pockets of habitat, unable to migrate to find new prey or mates, effectively turning their evolutionary stronghold into a cage. This isolation triggers a phenomenon known as the extinction vortex. In a large, connected wetland, genetic diversity is maintained through constant movement. But in a fragmented landscape, populations become islands. When a group of crocodiles is trapped in a small, disconnected pool, they are forced into endogamy, inbreeding. This reduces the heterozygosity of the population, stripping away the very genetic variation that allows them to adapt to new diseases or changing environments. We are witnessing the forced simplification of a genome that took millions of years to perfect. Furthermore, fragmentation disrupts the genetic rescue effect. In nature, if a local population suffers a die-off due to a drought, individuals from a neighboring river system would eventually migrate in to replenish the gene pool. Today, a highway or a concrete levee acts as an impassable wall. A local population can be wiped out by a single bad season, and because they are physically cut off from their cousins, there is no way for new life to bridge the gap. Even more alarming is a silent, chemical assault on their fundamental biology. As apex predators, crocodilians are subject to extreme biomagnification. Because they sit at the top of the food web, they accumulate concentrations of heavy metals and persistent organic pollutants, like PCBs and pesticides, that are thousands of times higher than those found in the surrounding water. We are seeing evidence that these modern toxins can interfere with the very endocrine systems that have remained stable since the Jurassic, potentially disrupting growth and immune function in ways their DNA cannot buffer against. Perhaps most critically, we are attacking the one thing the crocodile cannot control, its reproductive clock. Crocodilians rely on temperature-dependent sex determination, or TSD. Unlike mammals, where sex is determined by chromosomes, the sex of a crocodile hatchling is dictated by the heat of the nest. For millions of years, this was a stable mechanism. But as anthropogenic climate change drives global temperatures upward, we are witnessing a dangerous skewing of sex ratios. In many regions, nests are producing almost exclusively females. This isn't just a demographic shift. It is a reproductive bottleneck that could collapse entire populations within a few generations. The crocodile has survived the death of the dinosaurs because it was built to endure scarcity and chaos. It has survived because it is a master of the slow life. But the Anthropocene is not a slow change. It is a high-velocity disruption. We are changing the chemistry of the water, the temperature of the sand, and the connectivity of the land faster than the crocodiles, slow motion, evolution can respond. The question is no longer whether the crocodile's design is perfect. The design is flawless. The question is whether even a masterpiece of engineering can survive a world that is changing faster than life itself can adapt. Can a biological fortress survive a poison it cannot see? We have discussed the physical barriers of dams and highways, but there is a more microscopic, more insidious invasion occurring within the very cells of these ancient predators. For 200 million years, the crocodile's body has been a master of sequestration, the ability to endure and isolate harmful substances. But the chemistry of the modern world is unlike anything the Mesozoic ever produced. We are witnessing the infiltration of the plastic age into a body designed for the age of stone and scale. It begins with the breakdown of macroplastics into microplastics and nanoplastics. These tiny, polymer shards are now ubiquitous in aquatic ecosystems, drifting through the water columns where crocodiles hunt. Because crocodilians are opportunistic generalists, they ingest these particles through every meal. However, the danger isn't just the physical presence of plastic in the gut, it is the Trojan horse effect. Plastics are highly lipophilic, meaning they act as chemical magnets. In the wild, they soak up persistent organic pollutants, POPs, from the surrounding water, concentrating toxins like DDT, PCBs, and flame retardants onto their surfaces. When a crocodile consumes prey contaminated with these particles, it isn't just eating food. It is ingesting a concentrated dose of concentrated industrial history. This leads us to the terrifying reality of biomagnification. Because the crocodile is an apex predator with a high-fat metabolic reserve, it acts as a biological sink. The toxins move from the plankton to the fish to the larger reptiles, and finally, they settle into the crocodile. These chemicals are stored in the adipose tissue, the fat reserves that allow them to survive months of famine. In a natural cycle, a crocodile might use these fats during a drought. But in the modern era, that energy reserve has become a toxic reservoir. When the crocodile metabolizes its fat to survive a lean season, It releases a massive, internal surge of accumulated toxins directly into its bloodstream. This is where the chemical assault meets the physiological miracle. We know that crocodilians possess an extraordinary ability to manage lactic acid and survive extreme hypoxia. But their endocrine systems, the delicate hormonal messengers that govern growth, metabolism, and immune response, are not built for synthetic interference. Research suggests that these endocrine disruptors can mimic natural hormones, tricking the crocodile's body into a state of hormonal chaos. This can lead to sublethal effects, a weakened immune system that makes them vulnerable to ancient pathogens or developmental abnormalities in the hatchlings that are too subtle to notice until the population begins to crash. We are effectively forcing an ancient, slow-moving biological machine to process a high-velocity, synthetic chemical load. The crocodile's evolutionary strategy has always been to wait, to endure, and to outlast the storm. But how do you outlast a storm that is made of molecules? How do you evolve a defense against a toxin that is woven into the very fabric of the food web? The crocodile's armor is thick, and its bite is legendary, but it has no shield against the invisible, molecular restructuring of its own blood. But what if the threat isn't just a chemical intruder, but a fundamental shift in the very thermometer of their existence? If the plastic crisis is a molecular invasion, then the warming of our planet is a structural assault on the very mechanism of their reproduction. To understand this, we must look beyond the scales and the teeth, down to the precise, delicate timing of a nest. Unlike mammals, where sex is determined by chromosomes at the moment of conception, most crocodilians rely on a phenomenon known as temperature-dependent sex determination, or TSD. In the world of a crocodile, the sex of an embryo is not written in its DNA. It is written by the heat of the sand. For millions of years, this has been a stable, predictable system. A slight fluctuation in the ambient temperature of the nesting site dictates whether the clutch will yield a generation of males or females. Generally, in many crocodilian species, warmer temperatures produce females, while cooler temperatures produce males. It is a sophisticated biological dance, synchronized with the seasonal rhythms of the Earth. But the dance is being disrupted. As global temperatures climb, we are witnessing a phenomenon that could lead to a demographic collapse. In many regions, the thermal windows that once produced a balanced ratio of males and females are shifting. We are seeing feminization on a massive scale. If the nesting sites become consistently too warm, entire generations could be born female. Imagine an ecosystem where the predator is abundant, but the lineage is hollow. A population of crocodiles can survive for decades as adults, looking as formidable and unchanged as their ancestors from the Jurassic. But if the sex ratio skews too heavily toward one gender, the effective population size plummets. There simply won't be enough males to fertilize the eggs. The population becomes a living ghost, a collection of aging individuals with no biological bridge to the future. This is compounded by a terrifying biological reality, the thermal threshold. Crocodilian embryos have a very narrow window of optimal temperature. If the heat exceeds a certain critical limit, it doesn't just change the sex, it triggers developmental failure. The embryo may suffer from heat stress, leading to higher rates of mortality or permanent neurological damage. Furthermore, we must consider the mismatch hypothesis. Crocodiles are masters of patience, but their life cycles are slow. They do not reproduce quickly, and they do not adapt in real time. While a mammal might see rapid evolutionary shifts in response to climate change, the crocodile's long generation time acts as an evolutionary anchor. They are moving at a geological pace in a world that is changing at a digital speed. We are witnessing a collision between ancient biological programming and modern atmospheric volatility. The very mechanism that allowed them to thrive in the shifting climates of the Mesozoic, the ability to let the environment dictate their biology, has become their greatest vulnerability. They have spent 200 million years perfecting the art of responding to the temperature of the world. But today, the world is turning up the heat faster than their ancient code can rewrite itself. The question is no longer whether they can survive the heat, but whether they can survive the silence of a nest that produces only one kind of life. Is perfection a trap? For 200 million years, the crocodile has been the ultimate biological constant. They have survived the asteroid that silenced the dinosaurs, the shifting of tectonic plates, and the rise and fall of entire mammalian lineages. They are, by every metric of evolutionary biology, a solved problem. Their anatomy is a peak, their metabolism is a masterpiece of efficiency. But in the theater of natural selection, being perfect can be a death sentence if the stage itself is pulled out from under you. This brings us to the ultimate, unsettling question: can an apex predator fail? To understand the failure of a perfect system, we have to look at the concept of evolutionary canalization. This is the process where a lineage becomes so specialized in its success that its genetic pathways become rigid. Crocodilians have optimized their existence for stability. They are built for a world of predictable rhythms, seasonal floods, cyclical heat, and steady prey availability. Their success is rooted in a low-energy, high-efficiency model that allows them to wait out the storms. But what happens when the storm never ends? The danger of an apex predator lies in its position at the top of the trophic pyramid. Because they are generalists, they can eat almost anything, but because they are ectothermic, they are fundamentally tethered to the thermal state of their environment. We have discussed the demographic collapse caused by temperature-driven sex ratios, but there is a deeper, more insidious threat: the decoupling of the predator from its prey. In a stable ecosystem, the predator and the prey exist in a delicate, co-evolved dance. But the digital speed of modern environmental change is breaking the rhythm. If the thermal shifts we are seeing cause a mismatch in the phenology, the timing of life events of their prey, the crocodile's greatest strength becomes its downfall. A crocodile can survive months without a meal, but it cannot survive a permanent shift in the abundance of the life it relies on. If the fish populations collapse due to ocean acidification, or the migratory mammals fail to arrive because of altered vegetation cycles, the crocodile's low burn metabolism offers no protection against a permanent void. Furthermore, we must confront the specialization paradox. While crocodiles are generalist hunters, they are specialists in their niche. They are the kings of the ecotone, the edge between water and land. But as human infrastructure fragments these edges through dams, levees, and urban sprawl, the edge effectively disappears. They are being squeezed into shrinking islands of habitat. An apex predator requires a certain amount of ecological space to maintain a viable population. When that space is carved into fragments, the very size and strength that make them formidable become liabilities, making them unable to migrate or find new territories. The tragedy of the crocodile is that they are not failing because they are weak. They are failing because they are too well adapted to a world that no longer exists. They are victims of their own success. They have reached a peak of evolutionary design so high that there is nowhere left to climb. In the face of a rapidly shifting Anthropocene, the living fossil faces its most terrifying challenge. How does a creature designed for eternity survive a decade of chaos? What if the greatest achievement of life is not the ability to change, but the refusal to do so? As we close this deep dive into the lineage of the crocodilian, we are left with a profound realization. We often view evolution as a frantic, upward climb, a constant race toward greater complexity, higher intelligence, or more specialized tools. We see the rise of the mammal, the flowering of the bird, and the complexity of the primate as the goal of biology. But the crocodile offers a different, more humbling perspective. It suggests that sometimes The pinnacle of existence is not a climb, but a perfect stillness. To look upon a crocodile is to look upon a biological stalemate. They have achieved what most organisms spend millions of years failing to do. They have reached an equilibrium with the laws of physics and the requirements of survival. Their osteoderms are not just armor, they are solar panels and calcium reservoirs. Their jaws are not just weapons, they are masterpieces of mechanical leverage that have remained unchanged since before the first flower ever bloomed. Their very blood is a chemical miracle, capable of enduring extreme lactic acid buildup that would paralyze a mammal in minutes. They are the eternal sentinels, standing watch at the water's edge, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires. They watched the dinosaurs vanish into the ash of a cosmic impact, and they simply waited. They watched the continents drift apart like rafts on a slow tide, and they simply adapted their range. They have mastered the art of the slow life, proving that in the grand economy of nature, the most successful currency is not energy consumption, but energy conservation. Yet, as we have explored, this perfection is a double-edged sword. The very stability that allowed them to survive the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction is the same stability that makes them vulnerable to the Anthropocene. The crocodile is a creature of the long game, a master of the geological epoch. But we are living in the era of the blink of an eye. We are changing the chemistry of the oceans, the temperature of the air, and the geometry of the land at a speed that defies the slow, rhythmic pulse of reptilian evolution. Evolutionary stasis is a testament to a design that works. But working is a relative term. A machine can work perfectly in a controlled environment, only to shatter when the room begins to shake. The crocodile is a masterpiece of a world defined by cycles, of seasonal floods, of predictable droughts, and of steady, ancient rhythms. As we fracture those cycles, we are testing the limits of a design that was never intended to face a world of constant, jagged volatility. As the sun sets on this chapter of life, we are left to wonder, is the crocodile's journey nearing its end, or is this merely another test of their legendary resilience? They have survived 5 mass extinctions. They have outlasted the giants. Whether they can outlast the shadow of humanity remains the greatest unanswered question in the history of life. For now, they remain silent, patient, and terrifyingly perfect, waiting to see if the world will once again return to the rhythms they were built to rule.